Welcome back, everybody. Today we're in Chapter 12, which deals with leadership, and today we're going to be looking at different leadership traits and some aspects of leadership that you may or may not be aware of, specifically the difference between transactional and transformational leadership. Now, that's what I want you to pay particularly close attention to today as we take a look at what it means not just to get the job done, but to transform the employee. All right, well, welcome back, everybody, and today we are moving right along. Today we're in Chapter 12, which deals with leadership, power, and influence. Now, as the slide shows you, there are different types of leadership styles. You have transformational, transactional, charismatic, and coalitional. And you've probably been exposed to at least one or maybe all four from time to time leadership styles. And if you're a leader, you probably have one style that you prefer over the others. So let's take a look at each of these styles of leadership. Now, transformational leadership is characterized by the ability to bring about significant change in followers in the organization. Transformation is what we're trying to seek with employees. It's not just a matter of you do this and us communicate and us interact that way. I tell you what to do and you do it. That's transactional leadership. And transactional leadership is the exchange process between leaders and followers. They'll do what you want them to do what you tell them to do, but there's no appreciable change in the employee's outlook, motivation, performance, or whatever. Transformation is, as the name implies, it changes the person, it transforms them. Take, for instance, Jesus. When Jesus gathered together the disciples at the very beginning, they didn't know anything. They were the most unlikely individuals that you could imagine. But little by little, Jesus integrated certain styles and certain techniques and certain principles to the disciples' lives, so that by the time Jesus left, they were transformed from simple men who followed Jesus to men who were able to carry on the work of Jesus. And that's what you want in business and in your churches. I mean, I don't preach just to impart information. When I preach with the Holy Spirit's power, the goal is to transform, not me myself, but the Holy Spirit who's working in me, to make a person realize that there's a new way, there's a different way, there's a better way, and that's what transformation does. Now, some of the major proponents of transformational leadership will tell you that it takes an investment. You are getting them to see things from a different perspective, and once they are aware of different realities, hopefully they will migrate towards those realities, and in this case, behaviors. For instance, a guy named Jack Mesereau talked about transformational learning, and Mesereau believed that we have the capacity to really change everything about ourselves. It's just a matter of being able to see new realities. He said transformation begins with what he calls a disorienting dilemma. And that means that we have gone through life believing one thing, and then all of a sudden, maybe that one belief is challenged. I was that way on mission work. My church never really emphasized it when I was growing up as a child. We had Annie Armstrong and Lottie Moon and the mission initiatives that we would give money to, but that was pretty much it. Only until I went on a mission trip and I saw the work of the missionary did I gain an appreciation for it. I was disturbed because this was something new. So I had a disorienting dilemma. And then once that occurs and you see a new reality that is different from what you might have been led to believe in the past, then you've got to start working it out. What do I want to believe? Do I want to believe the old way of thinking, or do I want to embrace the new? So you'll try out that new reality. For me, it was going on a mission trip. That was trying it out. And then you may look for other people who are engaged in that new way of thinking and so forth. And for me, I was with other missionaries. And little by little by little, my attitude and my behaviors and my perspective changed when it came to mission work. Well, that's the same thing you do in business. In business, you introduce people to new challenges, things that they have not had to deal with before, and they work through these challenges, and you support them throughout the change process. But once they realize that there's a better way of doing things, an easier way of doing things maybe, a more productive way of doing things, then they start to embrace that into their own paradigm or their own way of thinking. So that's transformational leadership, someone who can facilitate those changes. Transactional leadership, again, recognizes followers' needs and desires, clarifies how the needs and desires will be satisfied in exchange for meeting objectives or performing duties, focus on the present and maintain stability within the organization, and is a good traditional management function. And many people still use the transactional approach because they're not aware of transformational leadership, or they really don't want to invest the time and effort that it takes to transform the employees. And just some of the points of transformational leadership: it paints a grand vision of the future. It inspires followers to go beyond their own self-interest. It elevates the concern of followers from low-level physical needs to higher-level psychological needs. And then we're getting back to Maslow now and those hierarchy of needs. And develops followers into leaders. Now think about this. Who are some of the people who inspired you the most? Who are some of the leaders that changed your life? Of course, we know Jesus. That's the catch-all. But has there been someone in your life who has had an impact on your life that has made you just have the attitude of, I want to be like him or her, or I would like to take on those characteristics that this person has? People who have inspired you, people who have really encouraged you to think beyond just the here and now, but realize your potential. These are probably transformational leaders, and they're going to be the ones that you remember long after those that just tell you to do something and you do it have faded into obscurity. Now, charismatic leaders. These people have the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally, and despite obstacles and personal sacrifice, you're going to do that. They are people who are maybe I think of the war heroes like Patton and MacArthur, and they inspired Eisenhower, who went and talked to the troops before they landed in Normandy. Many of those men were going to die, and he knew it, but yet he went and he inspired them. He encouraged them. That's a charismatic leader. Now, these types of leaders instill awe and submission. They can lift the organization's level of energy and performance. Charisma can't be learned, but aspects can be used by anyone. And it comes from activities you have a passion for and engages emotions in everyday work life. And that's the key, folks, with charismatic leadership. They are able to evoke emotions out of you. Now, for instance, charismatic leadership can be both good and bad. I have seen charismatic leaders lead people, inspire them like the ones that I've mentioned, but I've also seen charismatic leaders manipulate, and they manipulate based on emotions. I'll never forget watching a TV evangelist one time, and he's still around and very, very popular on TV, and I think he's appeared in some movies and stuff. He was at a women's conference in New Orleans, and they're at the Superdome. And he starts to speak, and you've got about 50,000 women there. And he begins by saying, I believe there's a woman hurting tonight. Well, about 50,000 women started screaming and yelling and saying, yeah, that's me, that's me. And he said, I believe there's a woman out here who is a mother who is grieving for her child right now. And of course, there goes another probably 40, 45,000. And then he says there's a mother here who is dealing with a child who is into drug abuse and crime. And all of a sudden, the whole place erupts again. What these people are doing are they're playing off your emotions. And they can, once they have you and that attachment has been made, they can really get you to do anything, because all throughout the stadium they had people with buckets and people were throwing money in it. That's why they're riding around in private jets, living in mansions and so forth, because they're telling people on an emotional level what they want to hear. And if you can connect like that, you've got them. I did it. That's how I was trained in the military to recruit people. When you want someone to do what you want them to do, you don't reason with them. Reasoning and logic have nothing to do with influencing people. Your ability to connect with them and have that emotional attachment, that's the key to it all. Think about Hitler. There was nothing really remarkable about Hitler, but he knew what to say and how to say it. And if you watch some of his speeches, you'll see how he will start out in a pretty much normal tone. The rate of his speech, delivery of speech, is pretty much constant. But as he starts to talk about Germany's heritage and future and the people of Germany, you can tell the passion within him is stirred. He will increase his speed and his volume, and he'll be yelling after a while and then using body language. And little by little, people don't realize it, but they're being drawn in. You start out tame, you start out really monotone maybe, and then you build up to like a crescendo. It's kind of like maybe a opera or a symphony. They build you up, and you psychologically don't even realize that they're doing it, but they can do it. So if you're knowledgeable in how to do that type of thing, there's really nothing you won't be able to do when it comes to influencing people. I pray that you will do it for God's work and that you don't try to manipulate for personal gain or anything like that. But this is what a charismatic leader does, and these are the qualities that they have in them. Now, Exhibit 12.1 just talks about the characteristics of charismatic and non-charismatic leaders. I'll let you guys take a look at that. Coalitional leadership. It's leadership that involves developing allies and building a coalition of people who support the leader's goals and can help influence others to implement the leader's decisions and achieve the goals. In other words, coalitional leaders know how to gather resources, other people who can come in and can help to facilitate or realize that leader's goals and so forth. So the things that the leader can't do, he or she will be able to get other people to do, and then you have like an army of people who are going after that goal. Now, under coalitional leadership, they observe and understand patterns of interaction and influence in the organization, and this is how they can broaden their scope of influence. And as you see here, they can develop connections by networking with people. And failing to build a coalition can allow conflict to derail a leader's decisions. So if you can't get them all on the same page, you can have divisiveness and confrontation and conflict within that organization. And that will, as you see here, derail or be counterproductive to the leader's goals. Now, steps for effective coalitional leadership: do a lot of interviews. Make sure the people who you're talking to will fit within that coalition. Visit customers and other stakeholders. Develop a map of stakeholder buy-in, and that's them really embracing your vision and your goals. And then break down barriers and promote cross-silo cooperation. And silos we've talked about in the past. Silos are individual entities within an organization. For instance, you may be in an organization that has its own HR department, its own operations department, its own administrative department, its own marketing or advertising or whatever. They're all individual. They really don't communicate a lot between themselves or among themselves. So each one becomes an entity unto itself. And that can cause problems, a lot of problems, especially when you're trying to get cooperation and teamwork. Because if you're not careful, each one of those silos will view themselves as the most important entity in that organization. So you have to bring about a structure that encourages cooperation and interdependence. They're interdependent, they just don't realize it as a silo structure. They just see themselves doing their little thing and that's it. They don't realize that what they do has an influence on what another department does, and that other department has an influence on another and so forth. So you need to break down barriers like that and promote cross-silo cooperation. And then here you see with Exhibit 12.2, mapping stakeholder buy-in. These are just kind of like the percentages. You have observers. These are stakeholders, and a stakeholder is any and everybody who has an interest in that organization or that objective. And it could be within the organization or outside the organization. But these are stakeholders who watch change from the sidelines. They have a neutral attitude. And that sounds like a whole lot of church members a lot of times. Then you have advocates, which are 10%. These are the ones who will champion and lead the change. You have partners. These are people who will support the change. And then resistors, those who defend the status quo and oppose the change. They just don't want things to be different than what they are now. So you've got to, with each of these, develop strategies to be able to gain as much buy-in as you can, and that's difficult. And that's why you have to do a lot of interviews and meet with people and get an idea of where their heart is and where their mind is and really what their motivations are. And then you can, from that, be able to develop a strategy to get more stakeholder buy-in. Many people, when they think about leadership, have thought about maybe the Hollywood version, the one who rises the troops up to the occasion to go into battle or whatever. But really, effective leadership is day-to-day living with the people, investing in them and developing them. Jesus did this. He was a teacher, he was a mentor, he was transactional, and he was, of course, transformational. So we really would do well to incorporate all of those methods into our way of managing people in the workplace. And as you see, they're complex. There's not just a cookie-cutter approach to leadership. You will have your predominant style, but that won't mean that you won't be using the other types in your ministry or in your organization. Well, that will do us for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.